Okay, thanks everyone for joining us. We've got James Taylor here. Um, you might have read James's post from May last year. Was caused quite a bit of sensation on social media. Why I wish I was a non-native English speaker, and it wasn't because some people pointed out that it should be why I wish I were a non-native speaker. But it was yeah, it was pretty shocking to some people and caused a bit of a stir. And so James kindly agreed to revisit the points that he made there in the original article and give the first webinar for several equity advocates, which I started in I think about April last year. Um, so it's only been going on for 9 months, and this is the first webinar, but there'll be more coming later on in the year from people like Tyson, and we'll have Hugh Della, um, and so I hope you'll enjoy this one and you'll join us for more webinars later on. And if you wanna visit the website, you can find the links on the left hand side just below the logo. And yeah, I'll leave you with James now. I'm sure you'll enjoy the webinar.
Okay, thank you very much, Marek. And for asking me to do this. I really appreciate the invitation. And yeah, so I'm also here representing BELTA, the Belgian English Language Teachers Association, and at BELTA we're very happy to support Marek with the Temple Equity Advocates campaign. Okay, so let me begin by just telling you a little bit about this webinar today, because it's not exactly a normal webinar presentation, in that I'm not going to just sit here and talk to you for the best part of an hour. You're actually going to have to do some work, I'm afraid. But I think I hope it'll be an opportunity for you to be able to express your feelings on this subject, as well as just listening to me. So I'm going to begin by talking about the blog post that Marek mentioned, that I wrote. And I'm just going to summarize what I wrote in that post. I'm not going to go into tons of detail, but just to give you a brief idea of what it was about. And then I've got a series of questions for you, which really came out of the response that Marek described that the post received, because I think it raised a lot of really important issues, and it'd be good to get some feedback from you as to what you think about it. I think it would be really interesting, and I think Marek would find it very useful as well. Okay, so here's the blog post itself that I wrote, as Marek said, back in May last year. And I should first mention the title, because it was much more effective than I thought it would be. But I did write it with that intention. I unapologetically say that I wrote it because I wanted to get people's attention and get them interested. What I didn't know was that Marek was going to put it next to a big picture of my face, and so everyone would see this big picture of my English face next to this title. But that maybe perhaps had some influence. I don't know. So yeah, I wanted to get people's attention, and I wanted to bring people to the website, because it was a new campaign. It just started, and I wanted just to bring people to the website so they could start to have a look around and see what the Temple Equity Advocates campaign was all about. So I knew that it was a provocative title, and I wanted it to be a provocative title, because I wanted people to think about this subject in a new way. I think traditionally there's always been this, in certain circles anyway, there's been this idea of the kind of the native teacher as this high level and the non-native teachers trying to sort of catch up to the native teachers' levels of teaching, which I think is complete nonsense. I don't think there are any levels at all. I just think there are lots of teachers. Some of them are really good, and some of them are not so good. And nationality or mother tongue doesn't really come into it. So I just wanted to sort of turn that whole notion upside down and let people try and think about it in a different way. So what motivated me to write the post was, as I said, the cause, the Temple Equity Advocates campaign, and what I think was trying to make an interesting perspective was the fact that perhaps people don't expect people like me, someone who benefits from this prejudice, to talk about how I have a problem with it. But I actually felt like if you're someone who benefits from a prejudice, you have an even greater responsibility to try and speak out against it because it's an unfair advantage. And so I just felt like I almost had like an obligation to try and do something. It didn't have to be write a blog post, but just to do something to try and fight back against what I perceive to be an unfair advantage. I wanted to remind or tell, I don't depending on the person, that my non-native English-speaking teacher colleagues that in my opinion, not that my opinion is massively important, but in my opinion, you are at least my equals in this industry. And in some ways, the post was a tribute to the teachers that I've worked with, and I've been fortunate enough to have taught English in 4 very different parts of the world, and in all of those places, I've had really fantastic colleagues who were local teachers, who were people that I aspired to be. So in some ways, I wanted, it was a kind of tribute to those people because they've helped me, become a better teacher as a result of being around them. And if I really, what I wanted to achieve, and it's not an easy thing necessarily to do, but I wanted to at least try and inspire some non-native teachers to try and do something about it, okay? To not just kind of complain about it, but actually be active and like say, okay, what can I actually do about this? So those were my objectives for writing the post. There were some objectives I didn't have, which perhaps some people who were not so happy about it projected onto me. Um, the, the article wasn't aimed at native English speaker teachers like me. It wasn't aimed at us. So I wasn't trying to say that non-native teachers are better or that native teachers are worse. And I wasn't trying to say there's nothing that can't be done if you're a native English speaker teacher. There are things that we can do about it to try and level the playing field, but that wasn't the point of the article. I wrote a follow-up blog post a couple of weeks later because of the reaction that it received, and here's, I'm going to quote myself here. I said, I wasn't trying to suggest that native English speaker teachers can't do anything about these issues, as I think they can. There are lots of things that native teachers can do, like learning the language of the country where they live or learning any other language, but that wasn't the point of the post. Native teachers don't need an article, they don't need that article as much as non-native teachers needed one about their strengths, in my view. Native teachers are the ones who can go virtually any country in the world and be guaranteed some kind of job. So this was not an article for them. However, this webinar today, it is for native teachers as well. So this webinar today is for everybody. Okay, so don't leave if you're a native English teacher. We need you to be part of this discussion too. Okay, so let me give you a brief guide to the strengths of non-native English speaker teachers, as I outlined in my blog post. So my first point of view was really about being a role model. Non-native teachers are a great role model for how to study and how to succeed. So most non-native teachers are teaching in their own country. They come from the same cultural and linguistic background as their students. They're basically people from the same society who have reached the goal that the students also share. So the students can look at their teacher and say, that person who's just like me has achieved exactly the thing I want to achieve. So I can never say that. I mean, as I said, there are things that I can do. I can learn languages and say, I have achieved in learning a language, but I can never say that I've learned English in the way that they have, in the way that you have. And I think that's really powerful. I think that's a really powerful thing to inspire your students. And I think it's also worth pointing out about pronunciation as well, of course, that nowadays we don't consider native speakers as role models for pronunciation. It's not a very realistic role model for our students. So that basically puts a fluent non-native English speaker on an equal level with someone like me. And I think it's much more realistic for students to see my non-native teacher colleagues as role models for everything, but including pronunciation, than it is to aim to speak like I do. It's much more realistic and more effective, I think. And I should mention here about English as a lingua franca, particularly with pronunciation, which is the idea of international English. It's entirely possible that actually by learning to speak like a native speaker, your students will find international communication more difficult because people from other countries may not have studied that particular way of speaking and they don't understand them. So I'm really been inspired by the ELF Prom website, which has got lots of really fantastic activities written by Laura and Katie, and I've just put the link there in the chat box. So if you're interested in this kind of international English pronunciation, then I recommend you go and have a look at their website. Okay. Marek gave you a little clue to this if you were here right at the beginning. But my question to you is, some teachers would correct Peter here. Any ideas why? You've got an idea why they would correct Peter's English. Bear in mind, Peter is a native speaker of the language. Why would they correct Peter's English? Yeah, so Joris and Vicky, you've already typed in. But some people might consider this incorrect because it should say, I wish I were Beyonce. And so does that look familiar, that structure? Have you seen that structure anywhere recently? Shouldn't be a very difficult question. When was the last time you saw that structure being used? I wish I was. Can you think of a specific example when you saw this last? Yes, thank you, David. It's the title of the blog post and indeed of this presentation, right? Because I wish I was a non-native English speaker. So I just thought it was funny because when I wrote that title, I wish I was. I never gave that a second thought. Didn't think about it for a second, and then it was shared around as it was, and on Facebook, someone who wasn't as keen on my article, some other people made a sarcastic comment about, well, you should have said, I wish I were, blah, blah, blah. I mean, it wasn't as explicit as that. And to be honest, I didn't even pick up on that at all in their comment. I didn't even notice it. And then Marek was also chipping in, helping out with the comments. And he pointed out that I wish I was is a perfectly acceptable form nowadays. And like any good teacher, he grabbed his copy of Michael Swan, turned to page 263 or whatever it was, and said, look, here it is. Michael Swan says it's fine. So, and it's true. And it just, for me, was quite a nice example of someone trying to sort of prove a point. And actually, the point they proved was that a native speaker of the language, did not notice this supposed error at all. And that Marek, a non-native teacher, was able to go in and deal with a correction that I just didn't pick up on. So I just thought it was kind of a funny example because it kind of proved my point, actually. So your non-native teachers have often got a better awareness of these kind of linguistic features, grammar, and different elements than native teachers. Of course, I'm massively generalising. I have colleagues who are native speakers who love grammar and are very obsessed with it, and I've also had colleagues who are the complete opposite. So, of course, I'm generalising, but I just think it's something that is generally true. And in case you're wondering, in the British National Corpus, there are about 3 times more examples of "I wish I was" than "I wish I were." So I'm right, these so I think that the point there is that you know what it's like to have to go through the experience of learning phrasal verbs and getting prepositions wrong and all of these kinds of things, and you can use that experience to help them as a non-native teacher. I can't. I was never aware of those things until I became a teacher. And even still, every day I see examples of things and I go, oh yeah, that's true. That is really hard for students. And I really, I empathise, but I've never had to deal with it firsthand. Okay, so my next point. This is a photograph I took here in Costa Rica, which I think is spectacular. If you're a kind of language nerd, I think it's amazing construction. I mean, you've seen mixed conditionals, but wow. Um, and it's representing an example of translation. I mean, I don't know if it was translated, but that's what I'm trying to get across here. It's not the best example of translation, if it is, but I think translation now has really come back into fashion. Correctly, I think it's been out of fashion for a while, but I think it's good to see it's come back. And for example, Philip Kerr has recently released a book called Translation and Language Activity, so I think it's got some real validity now. Clearly, a non-native teacher is in a better position to use L1 than a native teacher. Clearly. I mean, and also clearly, a native teacher can learn the language, but to get to that level of competence in the language doesn't happen overnight. It takes a long time. So when it comes to translation in the classroom, it's clear to me that the local non-native teachers are in a much better position. Okay, and then this slide here is a photograph I took of a traditional Costa Rican ox cart wheel. And what you can't see in this picture, because you have no sense of perspective, and it's actually the world's biggest ox cart, which is some kind of boast, I guess. But it's very beautiful, I think. I really love these ox carts. So it represents culture, and specifically in this case, it's talking about the local culture. And I think that the non-native teachers have a better awareness of what English means to the people in their culture and the environment in which they're learning. They have a better idea about the kind of educational background of learners and how learning happens in that country. I recently heard on the Freakonomics podcast about they did back in March last year. They did, or was it May? March or May? I can know it's American dates. It's hard to know. They looked at is English is learning a foreign language really worth it? And it said that the value of learning English. By value, I mean like the economic value. In Turkey, Russia, and Israel, people who speak English are associated with a substantial return of around 10 to 20%. In other words, they earn about 10 to 20% more money than people who don't speak English. So, it's like very tangible in a lot of countries, the difference that English makes. And non-native teachers are really in a good position to know what this really means to people, especially if you teach adults, as I do. Okay, the next point I made was also about culture, but in this case, it was about the culture of the English language, uh, if that exists, which it doesn't really anymore, because English is such an international language that this idea of a kind of homogenous English language culture is just too big. There's just too many factors involved. There's too many things. So I know my own culture very well, but I only represent a narrow aspect of this wider culture of the English language. None of these uh, cultures are superior to any other. Um, it's just a matter of taste and opinion as to which ones you find more interesting or engaging. And there's no reason why a non-native teacher can't have a more or at least equally well-rounded view of the global culture of English than anyone else. Most of that culture isn't mine either, so I don't know South African culture at all. There are huge areas of the US that I've never been to. I've never been to Canada. I don't know that much. I only have a kind of surface knowledge of these things. So I don't really have any advantage when it comes to that. I only have knowledge of my own culture, and then even then it's particular aspects of it. I don't know the entire cultures of the United Kingdom, for example. Okay, so those were the basic points that I outlined on the blog. And as Marek mentioned at the beginning, it really did have this big reaction, and there were a lot of comments on the blog and on Facebook and on Twitter, and it was just really interesting. So what I wanted to do today was really kind of extend that conversation and reflect upon what people said. So what I've done is I've prepared 6 questions that I want to ask you, and I want you to tell us together what you think about these issues. Okay, so my first question is, do you have any personal experiences that you'd like to share? Now, when I say personal experiences, I mean, have you ever actually personally been someone who has been in a position where you feel like you've been there's been a prejudice against you because you are a non-native English speaker teacher? Or indeed, are you someone who is a native English speaker teacher who has actually benefited from the fact that from where you were born? I mean, I can tell you from my personal point of view that when I first became a teacher, I had no experience or qualifications, and I was given a chance, which of course I'm very grateful for. But and I can't say exactly why, but I'm sure that a part of that was because that I'm English, and maybe perhaps the fact that had I been from another country, maybe I wouldn't have been given the same opportunities. I also taught in Korea, as David does here, and in fact David might be able to confirm if this is still true or not. But to when I get, and yours as well, of course, that would be interested to know what yours story is, because when I got my visa as an English teacher, I was told that there were only 6 countries that you could come from where you could get an English teacher's visa, which were the UK, Australia, New Zealand, the US, Canada, and South Africa. So yeah, and as it says here, oh, there are 8 now. Okay, well, which are the other 2? Not to know. So, had I been born in another country and been far more qualified than I was and experienced, I wouldn't. It doesn't matter. I'm not interested. We're not going to give you the visa. We're not going to give you a job. So yeah. So I would love to know what if you have any experiences that you'd like to share. Please share them in the chat window here. And as you're typing, I will interact. Oh yeah, of course, Ireland. Yeah, of course, Ireland was one of the countries as well. So yes, it must have been 7. Yeah, I had Irish colleagues. So Vicky, when you say that when you say when I tell them I was born in Canada, do you mean people that you were being interviewed by, or people like this? Or do you mean so you mean students as well? That's interesting. I don't know, yeah, because you say that. Well, that's I mean the fact that they get paid more to do the same job is outrageous. I think. Um, but yeah, I'm glad your students are happy with you. Well, that's good to hear, Sergio, that things have improved in Spain. Yeah, thank you, Adi. I mean, that's a really bizarre story, isn't it? You know, I guess that will lead into another question I have later. But it's people doing the hiring who are not necessarily qualified to know what a good teacher is. Yeah, Evelyn, that's it just shouldn't be allowed simply, you know, and it probably isn't allowed, but they get away with it. And Adam, yes, I know how you feel. Yeah, thanks, Ellen. Yeah, it's that double standard. I don't have a problem with them asking you to prove that you speak English well, but the problem is that they didn't also demand the same thing from the English native speakers, because of course there's no guarantee that um, they have the same, they have enough level of language awareness. Yeah, Maria in Greece, you mentioned about the problem with parents. Yeah, Helen, it's that kind of decision where you keep your name um, for that reason. And it's kind of unfortunate, isn't it? That's necessary, but it's quite understandable. That's a really interesting distinction, David, I think. Um, yeah, and I think that basically is a recognition of the fact that a lot of the teachers that are hired there in Korea um, are not up to that job of teaching the grammar. Yeah, Priscilla, I completely agree. I've met many of your colleagues from Brazil, and Brazil, you seem to have an ability to produce really phenomenal teachers. I completely agree. Yeah, um, T in Brazil. I'm not sure what you're whether you're a Tiago or, but yeah, it's yeah. There's a prejudice, a clear prejudice there, isn't there? That decision that was made. Isn't that interesting, Marjorie? Anyone would think that's very, very interesting. You're welcome, Ariana. Yeah, Barbie, maybe you should. Well, Sergio, that's a good question. It's definitely true. I mean, there really are. Uh, it's very hard to generalize, about this thing of what's it like in different areas. Um, and I think that's part of what Marek is trying to do, is trying to figure out, what's going on in different places in the world. Karen, that's nice to hear about Israel. Very good. Yeah, Adi, these kind of expectations that people have about things, it's very, very curious when you really think about it, where these ideas come from. I can pronounce Tiago. Don't worry, Tiago. Okay. Eu falo português, mais ou menos. Yeah, yeah, Pavel, the Groupon course, yeah, that's interesting. I mean, it's okay if you want to figure out what's going on in the world of, is this a job I want to do or not? But, I don't think it's something to say, okay, this is actually a proper qualification or to show off about. And Marjorie, that thing about foreign degrees is really a big international problem, I think. Happens in a lot of places. Um, Sergio, so to answer your question, I had very different teaching environments in the different places. So I started teaching in Brazil, um, where it's difficult for me to think about it because I have to reflect back on it. It's not something I really thought about. Um, but yeah, I mean, obviously Brazil is such a huge country. It really depends where you are. But I don't think it's as big a problem as it is in other places. I had lots of Brazilian colleagues uh, in I taught in Korea, where it seems that there is a kind of it seemed to me anyway there was very much an idea that we need native teachers to improve our English, um, and I hope that they're improving their attitude a bit. I mean, I was part of a teacher training program, so the idea was that eventually we'd all be replaced by local teachers, but I don't know how successful that's been in the years since. Uh, David and would have a better idea than me. In Belgium, I was freelance, so all my colleagues were people I've met through Belter, um, and so I'm not in the best position to talk about Belgium, but I think there's a big difference between state schools and the private sector. And here in Costa Rica, you'll find that there's a lot of schools which want to show off about the fact they have native teachers who are qualified. Luckily, I work at the school which talks about their qualified teachers, not their native teachers. It's good to hear that, Chuck, about the improvements in Japan. Excellent. Okay, this is really fantastic, people. If you're my students, I'd be showering you with praise right now. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the next question now because of time. Um, and so my next question for you is this question: what is a native speaker nowadays? What does that mean to you? Is that a useful term anymore? It's all going to really depend on your context and how you view this question. So I'd love to know what you think. That's Chuck. That's because you're a man of the world. It's a very nice definition, yes. Very nice. So you've had some very interesting answers. So I'm gonna. I think part of what I'm getting at now, is that the fact that English is so international that there are going to be people soon who've never been to an English-speaking country, and yet they were learning English from a very early age, and they speak to a high level. Um, so what are they? You're absolutely right. Yeah, that's true. You only have to look at my Facebook feed to see that I know lots of people who were born in the UK who were passport owners who have never spoken another language and don't know how to punctuate, don't know how to write the difference between your and there and there and there and write um, a could of instead of a could have. Absolutely, David. Exactly, Chuck. That's exactly the kind of person we need to have in mind nowadays. Your son is an absolute perfect example. You're right, Anne. It could be a whole webinar in and of itself. Yeah. Okay, fascinating stuff. Let's move on to the next question. So this was a really crucial question that came out of it. Shouldn't we be ignoring the whole idea of the difference between non-native English speaker teachers and native English speaker teachers? Just talk about good teachers instead. Thank you, Helen. I think it's worth uh, bearing in mind. I mean, you can interpret this question in different ways, of course. Is that this is like the end game? This is what we should be aiming towards. Okay, a situation where this whole conversation is unnecessary. But right now, it is necessary, isn't it? And so, at this point in time, perhaps we do need to be like having this conversation we're having now, where we talk about um, the strengths and weaknesses of the two different types of teacher, and perhaps then trying to address them head on, so that we can then get to a situation where this discussion isn't necessary anymore. If you see my point there. Thank you for coming, Mariana. Appreciate it. And I completely agree with what you've just said. Although in some ways I'm glad that that didn't exist earlier on in my career, or so I might not be sitting here now. But I can't argue with it. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next question now. Lots of fantastic comments. Thank you so much. Um, I agree with you, Marjorie. Yeah, yeah. Okay. Some people think that students prefer to have a native English speaker teacher. But do you believe this? Any experiences that anyone's had with the students and the students' expectations? Okay, yeah. Well, David points out the parents do, the students is not so sure. So you can teach. I think with this question, you can sort of treat parents and students as all part of the same equation. I teach adults, so I don't. I always, I don't naturally think about parents. It's not relevant for me. Yes, I agree with you, Tiago. It's just you have to very diplomatically explain that, I think. agree with you, Helen. We're going to come on to that in a second. Thanks for coming, Chuck. Really appreciate it. It's a fair point, Evelyn, but I think it's very rare. I don't think I've ever really had to. I think students they quite like it, you know, especially because the countries where I've taught a British accent is more unusual, so they quite like the novelty. But I don't think they really need to be exposed to a British accent in my experience. I think that's an interesting point that Addy and Barbie make there about students actually being a bit scared of, intimidated maybe by native teachers. Of course, not all natives are equal as well. Of course, it's worth considering. I met someone recently who was who's a Scottish chap who was teaching here in Costa Rica, and he was told by his school to tone down his Scottishness. Yeah, how would you feel if someone told you to tone down your nationality? Yeah, isn't that absolutely right, David? That's exactly the reality. Time's ticking, and I should move on to the next question. Um, so having native English speaker teachers is just a business decision often made by school owners who are themselves non-native English speakers. You notice I put non-native English speakers, not non-native English speaker teachers. So how do you feel about this? That it's often local people who own the schools who are the people who are guilty of this kind of discrimination? See, this is the problem, Helen, when you give a presentation to English teachers. Can't slip up. You carry on talking now. I'm just going to have a little breakdown. So I'm going to overrun slightly. But not too much longer, don't worry, I'm nearly done, just a few more minutes. I have one more question for you. It does contain another errant apostrophe. Apologies in advance. Here we go. Okay, so this is the big question, okay? And this is Marek's here. Marek's the guy who's really, doing a lot of work on this subject. So this is your chance to tell him, what can we do to improve the situation of non-native English speaker teachers? Thank you, Addy. Yours. I think you kind of missed the point, really, a little bit there, yours. Don't worry, yours. Yeah, thank you, Anne. I think that's a really important point to take away if you're a native speaker. Oh, well, absolutely. And that's true for everybody, right? Um, Helen, I think that's a really good point. I absolutely agree. As the president of a teaching association, I completely agree with you. Yes, David, absolutely. Don't just let it go. Adam, yeah, be provocative. Get people thinking about what it actually means. Yeah, absolutely, Nina. That's the way it should be. Well, Adam, that's a good question, and you've been following that discussion on the Facebook page of RTEFL. If it is discussed at RTEFL, it will be informally. I imagine. Okay. So if you have any more ideas for, even practical things that can be done to improve, oh, Helen, please, you're right. I know, but stop it. You make me feel terrible. Um, the I did that on purpose so you could see that native speakers have very poor language awareness. So um, if you have any more, and I mean, really practical ideas for things that perhaps Marek could have on his website, and things that would actually be helpful on a practical level, and feel free to add them to the chat box while I continue just a few more minutes because I just want to wrap up by saying a couple of things. So, firstly, I want to um, I have a message, a couple of messages I want to send. So my first message is for my any native English speaker teachers who are here. So I just want to acknowledge that this prejudice that is happening against teachers because of their place of birth is not the only form of prejudice in the world, and of course there are other things that can happen. There's problems with gender, race, sexuality, or indeed the fact that often teachers are low paid for the work that we do. So if you're in that, you may not be in the situation where you're the victim of prejudice because of your place of birth, but there may be other reasons why you are. And if you want to try and do anything about those things, then you'll need allies, you'll need people to help you. Well, this is your opportunity to be one of those allies to some people, your colleagues, who need your help in trying to deal with this form of prejudice. And I know it's relative, of course. As we've mentioned, this situation can be very different in different places in the world. So you shouldn't assume that what you see around you is actually representative of the global situation. It may be better, it may be worse, but it's good to just to bear in mind that this what is happening may not in front of you may not actually be what is happening for a lot of other teachers around the world. Um, from my point of view, I see it as that if one member of our profession is suffering prejudice, then we all are. And as a as a teacher, I don't want to work in a school where my qualifications and experience aren't valued. where all they care about is where I was born, you know. Because if you work in this kind of school, then essentially you're not being treated as a professional, you're being treated as a marketing tool. So just out of your own self-interest, it should be, if you want to be a real professional teacher, then it's for your own good to be working in a place which employs people based on the fact that they are also fellow professionals. Um, and I think that with privilege comes responsibility, as I mentioned at the beginning. Um, if you have, if you benefit from privilege, then you have a responsibility to try and do something about stopping that privilege from continuing. I want to share a quote with you that I read the other day, and it's by a philosopher educator called Maisha Cherry. She says, equity has never hurt anybody. Seeing each other as the same and helping another rise to one's level has never caused the downfall of any nation or empire. Rather, it was always ego and denial that destroyed great civilizations. You will not only hurt others when you refuse to when you refuse to acknowledge and give up your privilege, but you will contribute to the downfall of the nation in which you so magically benefit from it. So, just something to think about there if you are a native English speaker teacher. And then my message to uh, non-native, my non-native colleagues is really that, well, I believe that in the future you will have more rights and you will be more respected by an industry in which you are the backbone. And I really think this is something that's really worth remembering. Okay? There are many, many more teachers like you than there are like me. So you have massive power, and I really think that people really need to realise that and to use it. Um, and here's your quote from Alice Walker. The most common way people give up their power is by thinking they don't have any. So I just want you to just reflect on those quotes, depending on which camp you fall into. Um, so thank you very much for coming today. Your contributions have been absolutely fantastic, really brilliant, and I think Marek is hopefully going to find it very useful in advancing his Temple Equity Advocates campaign. You can find here the links to some of the things that I've mentioned here. There's the original blog post. Sorry, it's a bit faint, but you can see the link there, and they're all clickable links. So there's the original blog post that I wrote, a follow-up blog post I wrote on my blog, some suggestions I wrote, practical suggestions for what can be done next. If you want to read the reaction on the Teaching English British Council Facebook page, which is very interesting, you can click there. Here's a talk that Philip Kerr did at our Bow today in 2013 about using translation, which is very interesting. And there's a link to his book that I mentioned as well. And there's the link to the ELF Prom website that I also mentioned. So thank you so much. I really genuinely appreciate it a lot. There was a lot of you here today, and it was wonderful to see you all. And thank you, Marek, for giving me the opportunity.
Thanks a lot, James. I thought it was very thought-provoking and very productive to see everyone here participating in the chat, and it's very, very interesting to hear it all from you and hear what you think about the issue. And I hope.
Marek's frozen there for me. Oh, he's disappeared. Okay, I'll take over for a second while we wait for him to come back. Here he comes. Thank you. Thank you for those comments, everyone. I really appreciate it there. Oh, I do. Okay. So thanks, everyone. Yeah, I'm going to. Oh, here he comes. Yep. Go ahead,
Yeah, I
Marek.
think I'm back. I don't know what happened.
Okay.
Sorry, but.
Okay.
But yeah, I just wanted to say thank you once again to everybody, and if you can, please spread the word about the webinars, and yeah, there'll be the next one is on the 10th of May with Hugh Deller, and Hugh Della will be
With who, sorry? Could you just say that again for us?
with Hugh Della, and Hugh Della will be talking about Lexis speaking and the non-native speaker teacher. So I think it's going to be a very interesting webinar as well, and I'd love to see you all there as well. And yeah, please tell everybody about it. And yeah, it should be an interesting year with TEFL Equity Advocates webinars.
Yeah, definitely. Marek, you should share your link again to your survey and tell people about it.
Yeah, I've been sharing the link to the research project that I'm doing in the chat, and I'm going to share it again here in the chat. I'd really appreciate if you could give the survey link to your students, and if you're a recruiter, you can do the survey for recruiters as well, and it basically examines the attitudes that recruiters and students have towards native and non-native speakers, and also what things they consider to be important in in successful teachers. So if you can share that, I'd really appreciate that. You really help in that little research project. And yeah, and I also wanted to thank BELTA, the Belgian English Language Teachers Association, for for all their support and help, and for allowing this webinar to happen as well. So so thank you.
Our pleasure. Frozen again. Well, I'm not sure what's happening with Marek, but thank you very much, everyone. I don't know if he's going to come back or not, but anyway, we really appreciate all your. I particularly appreciate it today because you had to do so much work, and normally you can just sit back with a cup of tea and watch what's happening, but you had to do some work today, and it was much appreciated. Okay. I got kicked out there. But, okay, Marek, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you fine. Yeah, I disappeared there for a second again. I don't know what's happening. But,
okay. Have you got anything else to say, or do you want to stop the recording?
no, it's fine. We can stop the recording, and we'll post it on TEFL Equity Advocates website as well.